The sapphire ring that once graced the hand of Princess Diana has long been more than just a piece of jewelry. It is a relic of memory, love, and sorrow, a symbol that carries the weight of history and the power of legacy. For the public, it represents the fairy tale and the tragedy of Diana's life. For her sons, William and Harry, it carries something even heavier, a private bond and a promise, a tangible reminder of the mother they lost too soon. Now, decades later, whispers and allegations swirl that this very ring has ignited chaos within the royal family, driving Harry into a rage after Meghan Markle allegedly laid claim to what he considers sacred. This is not simply the tale of a gemstone. It is the story of how one object became the spark of a storm that threatens to unravel family ties and shake the monarchy's fragile image. Imagine this, an heirloom so potent it has the power to reopen wounds thought long healed. Diana's sapphire ring was never just a ring. Chosen by a young Diana in 1981, not from a collection of custom jewels, but from a jeweler's catalog, it symbolized her independent spirit. Unlike the private commissions of queens before her, Diana selected the piece that spoke to her heart. At the time, it was controversial. Some critics said it wasn't unique enough, not fitting for a future queen. Yet once Diana slipped it on her finger, it became iconic. When the public gazed at her, they didn't just see a princess. They saw a woman who dared to make choices for herself. That ring became a symbol of Diana's humanity, her glamour, and her heartbreak. And when Diana died, it became something more, a relic imbued with grief, locked in the vault of memory, with two boys left to treasure what was left of their mother. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Harry, the younger of the two, felt this ring was his connection to her. As boys, William and Harry were given the chance to choose keepsakes from their mother's personal belongings after her passing. William chose the gold Cartier watch, while Harry chose the sapphire ring. It was his, a symbol he held close to his heart. Years later, when William was preparing to propose to Kate Middleton, Harry made a decision that revealed both his generosity and his pain. He agreed to give the sapphire ring to his brother, allowing Diana's spirit to live on in the future queen's hand. The image of Kate wearing the ring, as William proposed, captivated the world. The public swooned, remembering Diana, and for a moment it felt as if Diana's story had not ended, but carried on. Yet, for Harry, deep down, that ring was never fully relinquished. It was something that would always feel like his, something he gave up, not because he wanted to, but because duty demanded it. Now, years later, that sapphire ring has returned to the center of a storm. Reports began circulating that Meghan Markle, Harry's wife, had somehow acquired or taken possession of the ring. The whispers painted the picture of a woman reaching into the past to claim something that did not belong to her. For the public, the story was instantly electrifying. Could Meghan, who had already been accused of seeking to model herself after Diana, truly have taken Diana's most famous jewel? And if so, what did that mean for Harry, for William, for the monarchy itself? From the very beginning of her relationship with Harry, Meghan had been compared to Diana. Her charisma, her style, her humanitarian work, all were scrutinized through the lens of Diana's memory. For some, Meghan represented Diana's spirit reborn. For others, she was an outsider trying too hard to mimic a legacy that could never be replicated. And so, when whispers emerged that Meghan had laid hands on the sapphire ring, outrage swelled. Critics claimed she had crossed a line. Supporters argued it was only natural. She was Harry's wife, the mother of his children, and thus part of Diana's story too. But beneath the noise of public opinion lay something far more raw and human: Harry's reaction. Those who know Harry say his anger was visceral. For him, this was not about jewelry. It was about betrayal, legacy, and the memory of the woman he loved most in the world. The ring was not simply a gem. It was the piece of his mother he once held closest. To hear that Meghan had allegedly taken it without his blessing cut him to the core. Sources described explosive arguments behind closed doors, words flung with the fury of a man who felt robbed of something sacred. It wasn't about the media or even about the monarchy. It was about Harry's grief, reignited and raw, spilling into his marriage and his life in a way he had not anticipated. The chaos did not remain private. The story spread quickly, fueled by media hungry for another chapter in the Harry and Meghan saga. Headlines branded Meghan as an interloper, a usurper of Diana's memory. Talk show hosts cracked jokes, commentators debated, and royal watchers analyzed every angle. Was this ring truly taken? Was it borrowed? Was it a misunderstanding blown out of proportion? The lack of clarity only deepened the storm, with each narrative painting Meghan or Harry in more extreme light. For William, the situation reportedly reopened old wounds with his brother. What had once been a shared pact of grief now became another battlefield in their fractured relationship. Why does this matter now? Because the sapphire ring has always been more than a piece of jewelry. It is a mirror, reflecting the struggle of a family caught between love and duty, memory and modernity. For Harry, it represents the part of his mother he feels slipping further away with each passing year. For Meghan, it may represent her effort to connect with Diana's spirit, to anchor herself in the royal story she married into. For William and Kate, it represents continuity, tradition, and the memory of the mother they two lost. In this way, the sapphire ring is no longer an object but a battlefield, each side projecting their desires and grief upon it. And so, the question emerges, did Meghan cross a sacred boundary by claiming the ring? Or is this merely another chapter in the relentless war between image and reality that has defined her and Harry's journey? The introduction of this story is not just about scandal. It is about the clash between past and present, between memory and ambition, between love and betrayal. It is about a ring that holds the power to reopen wounds, to divide brothers, to inflame a marriage, and to send shockwaves across the monarchy. This is where our story begins, with a piece of jewelry that has sparked chaos, ignited fury, and raised questions that no royal statement can fully silence. The ring is not just a gemstone. It is Diana's ghost, haunting every decision, every conflict, every moment of love and loss her sons have endured. And now, with Meghan at the center of the storm, the legacy of Diana's sapphire ring has become the fuel for one of the most explosive royal controversies in recent memory. What unfolds from here will not only test Harry and Meghan's marriage, but may very well redefine how history remembers the sons of Diana. There are pieces of jewelry that dazzle because of their craftsmanship, their rarity, or their sheer monetary value. Then there are those that transcend the world of material worth to become symbols etched into cultural history. Princess Diana's sapphire engagement ring belongs firmly to the latter category. At its core, it is a Ceylon sapphire weighing over 12 carats, encircled by 14 solitaire diamonds, and set in 18-carat white gold. But to call it a sapphire ring is to miss the point entirely. It was the ring that transformed a shy kindergarten teacher into the future Princess of Wales, the ring that became the emblem of a fairy tale romance that would captivate billions, and the ring that, in time, would come to embody heartbreak, betrayal, loss, and enduring memory. When Diana first selected the ring in 1981, her choice raised eyebrows. Traditionally, royal brides-to-be did not pick jewelry off a catalog. Rings were commissioned or drawn from the crown's private collection. Yet Diana chose from a Garrett catalog, the official crown jeweler, a piece that was not bespoke, but available for anyone with enough wealth to buy. This sparked whispers. Was it too common? Too ordinary for a future queen? But Diana was never one for conformity. In picking that sapphire ring, she unknowingly made a declaration. She would follow her instincts, not tradition. The sapphire stood out in a sea of diamonds. Its deep blue was bold and unconventional. That color would later become synonymous with Diana herself, mysterious, beautiful, yet shadowed by sorrow. When she wore it for the first time in her engagement portraits, paired with a striking cobalt blue dress, the world collectively gasped. Overnight, the image became iconic. Millions of women envied the ring. Millions of men admired the romance it seemed to signify. Jewelers around the world scrambled to make replicas, and for years, women would adorn their fingers with knockoffs of the Diana ring. It was not merely jewelry, it was a cultural phenomenon. But beneath the sparkle lay a complicated truth. That ring, chosen in youthful naivety, was also a harbinger of what was to come. The fairy tale it represented at the beginning was soon eroded by the reality of Diana's troubled marriage to Prince Charles. The same photographs that once beamed with joy became reminders of the illusion. The ring sat on Diana's hand through years of heartache, betrayal, and her painful unraveling in the eyes of the world. Each time she lifted her hand in public, the sapphire seemed to mock the happy ending that never was. Yet Diana herself transformed the ring into more than a broken promise. Even after the collapse of her marriage, she continued to wear it, not as a mark of her union with Charles, but as a part of her identity. The sapphire came to symbolize not only her royal position, but her individuality. It was hers, no matter what. In the turbulent years leading up to her tragic death, the ring remained steadfast, a companion through her battles with the press, her crusades for humanitarian causes, and her role as mother to two boys she adored. By the time of her untimely death in 1997, the ring was etched into the world's memory as inseparably tied to Diana herself. The aftermath of Diana's death saw the ring retreat into the vaults of memory and secrecy. The world mourned as William and Harry walked behind their mother's coffin, boys transformed into symbols of grief. When they were given the chance to take something of their mother's as a keepsake, Harry chose the sapphire ring. For him, it was the piece that most captured her essence. William picked the Cartier watch Diana had worn daily. In that moment, the ring was no longer a public spectacle. It was a private token of loss, locked in Harry's possession and his heart. It was his mother's touch, frozen in stone and gold. The cultural meaning of the sapphire ring grew even stronger when, years later, William used it to propose to Kate Middleton. Harry, in what many viewed as an act of selflessness, agreed to let the ring go to his brother. William himself acknowledged that it was his way of ensuring Diana did not miss out on his engagement and marriage. When Kate appeared with the ring glittering on her hand, the world once again gasped, but this time with nostalgia. For millions, it was as if Diana herself had returned in some small way. Kate, with her poise and warmth, wearing Diana's sapphire, appeared to bridge the gap between past and present. The monarchy basked in the glow of this continuity, using the ring to reinforce its narrative of stability and legacy. Yet for Harry, the ring would always remain more than just an heirloom. Giving it up was not a casual choice. It was a sacrifice. And sacrifices, even when made willingly, often leave wounds that never fully heal. The ring was his first treasure from his mother, something he clung to in the darkness of grief. To see it now on his sister-in-law's hand, admired by the world, must have stirred a complex web of emotions. Pride, yes, but also longing, resentment, and loss. In many ways, the ring embodied the unspoken differences between William and Harry, the future king who bore the crown's weight and the younger brother forever caught in his shadow. Outside the family, the ring continued to carry weight. Every public sighting of Kate wearing it was splashed across headlines. Each magazine cover reminded the world of Diana, and by extension, Harry. The sapphire was no longer a private relic. It had been reabsorbed into the monarchy's public narrative, a jewel rebranded as a symbol of continuity rather than grief. But to Harry, who had once held it in his hand, the meaning was far more intimate. That dichotomy between public meaning and private memory is what makes the ring unique and volatile. The importance of this sapphire ring cannot be overstated. It is the ultimate symbol of Diana's presence, her life, her story. It is a relic that intertwines love, loss, and identity, and it continues to influence the family's destiny. So when whispers emerged that Meghan Markle had somehow laid claim to the ring, it was not just a story of jewelry being passed from one hand to another. It was a story of ownership, memory, and power. The cultural weight of the ring, the personal pain it held for Harry, and the public's insatiable fascination with it created the perfect storm. This chapter of the story is not about accusations or chaos yet. It is about understanding the profound gravity of what that sapphire ring represents. Without this knowledge, one might dismiss the controversy as trivial gossip, a squabble over a shiny object. But with the history laid bare, the truth becomes clear. This is not just about a sapphire. This is about the legacy of a woman who changed the monarchy forever, and the two sons who inherited not only her love, but also her grief. The sapphire ring is a vessel for all of it: joy, sorrow, sacrifice, and now, scandal. By the time Meghan allegedly touched that ring, she was not simply wearing a jewel. She was stepping into decades of memory, into the space where love and loss intertwine, into a history that belongs not only to Harry and William, but to the world that watched Diana's story unfold. That is why this sapphire, this piece of stone and gold, defined not only a generation, but continues to shape the chaos of today. After Diana's death in 1997, the world witnessed two boys forced to grow up in the harsh glare of public tragedy. William and Harry, aged just 15 and 12, walked behind their mother's coffin with expressions that captured the sorrow of an entire nation. That moment crystallized them in the public eye, not as princes, but as grieving sons. In the years that followed, their bond was described as unbreakable, forged in the fire of shared loss. They had not only lost their mother, but also endured the relentless media attention that came with her absence. In that shared grief, they made promises to one another. Unspoken vows to guard Diana's memory, to protect what little they had left of her, and to carry her legacy forward in their own ways. One of the most tangible ways this promise manifested was through Diana's personal belongings. After her passing, her jewelry, clothes, and personal items were divided in a way that would give both boys a keepsake. For Harry, the sapphire ring was more than just a jewel. It was the most powerful symbol of his connection to Diana. He clung to it as a reminder of her presence, something that would never leave him even as the world around him changed. For William, it was the Cartier watch Diana had worn daily, a constant reminder of her presence and the rhythm of her life. Together, these objects became tokens of survival, each boy with his own piece of Diana, promising never to forget her or the bond they shared. The brothers' relationship in those years was shaped by that promise. They leaned on one another, confided in one another, and relied on their shared understanding of grief. There were no others who could truly comprehend what it meant to be Diana's sons. In the public eye, they were royals, symbols of continuity. But privately, they were orphans trying to navigate life without the warmth and guidance of the woman who had given them their humanity. The promise to hold on to Diana's memory was not just about jewelry. It was about survival, about clinging to something real in a world that often felt staged. As William grew older and began preparing for his future role as king, the sapphire ring remained with Harry. Friends of the brothers often spoke about how Harry would look at it with a kind of reverence, turning it over in his hand as if holding on to Diana herself. For Harry, Diana was the parent who had truly understood him, who had comforted him when he felt isolated. That ring, therefore, was not just a reminder of her, but of the love and safety he craved. He guarded it fiercely, almost as if it were a part of himself. But when William decided to propose to Kate Middleton, everything changed. William, in a gesture filled with symbolism, wanted Diana to be present at the engagement. He believed the sapphire ring was the perfect way to do it. Yet there was one problem: it belonged to Harry. Accounts suggest that William approached his younger brother and asked for the ring. Harry faced a dilemma that cut straight into his heart. On one hand, the ring was his most precious possession, his promise to Diana, and the one piece of her he could truly call his own. On the other hand, giving it to William meant allowing Diana to remain at the forefront of the monarchy, to symbolically watch over the woman who would one day be queen. It was in this moment that the promise between the brothers was tested. Harry ultimately gave the ring to William, a decision that spoke volumes about his loyalty, his generosity, and his willingness to sacrifice his personal connection for the sake of family and duty. Friends say he did it without complaint, that he told William it was more important for Diana's memory to live on through the future queen. Publicly, this decision was celebrated as a testament to the brothers' bond, proof of Harry's devotion to his brother and to his mother's legacy. When Kate Middleton appeared with the sapphire glittering on her finger, the world cheered. The ring that once symbolized tragedy now symbolized hope and continuity. Diana's presence had returned to the heart of the monarchy. But privately, the story was more complicated. Sacrifice often leaves scars. For Harry, giving up the ring was not just a gesture, it was a loss. He had surrendered the one piece of Diana that had always been his. While he knew the symbolism was powerful, he could not escape the feeling of emptiness that followed. The promise between brothers, while intact, had also cost him dearly. William, after all, would inherit the crown, the role, the privileges. Now he had the ring too. And though Harry would never admit it publicly, there must have been moments when he wondered if he had given up too much. The public adored the symbolism, but it masked the quiet fracture that had begun forming between William and Harry. Their promise to protect Diana's memory was still there, but their roles in carrying it forward diverged. William became the custodian of Diana's public image, framing her as a mother who guided him into kingship. Kate wearing the sapphire ring reinforced that narrative. Harry, however, was left with the private grief, the memories that were not for cameras or headlines. The balance between them shifted. William carried the public torch, while Harry carried the private flame. That balance became even more strained as the years went on. Harry often spoke of feeling like the spare, overshadowed by William. In some ways, the ring symbolized that dynamic. William wore Diana's legacy on his wife's finger, visible to the world, celebrated by the press. Harry's sacrifice, meanwhile, was invisible. His part of the promise had been kept in silence, in loss. This unspoken tension simmered beneath the surface, even as the brothers smiled for cameras and assured the world that their bond was unbreakable. The promise between them remained intact in principle, but reality began to test its limits. When Meghan entered Harry's life, she inevitably stepped into this landscape of memory, rivalry, and unspoken resentment. The ring was no longer just a symbol of Diana's love. It was a marker of the sacrifices Harry had made and the imbalance he often felt. When whispers began that Meghan had laid claim to the sapphire ring, the outrage was not simply about jewelry. It was about the violation of that sacred promise between brothers. Harry had once given the ring up willingly for William's happiness, for the monarchy's continuity. But if Meghan had truly taken it into her possession, it shattered the very foundation of that act of sacrifice. What makes this chapter so crucial is that it lays bare the emotional weight Harry carried long before Meghan was in the picture. The promise between the brothers was never just about loyalty. It was about grief, sacrifice, and the silent wounds that never healed. The sapphire ring was the heart of that promise. For William, it was a symbol of continuity. For Harry, it was a symbol of loss. That tension would remain unresolved, waiting for the moment it would erupt into chaos. In understanding this, one can see why the allegations surrounding Meghan and the ring struck such a nerve. It was not merely a matter of possession. It was a matter of trust, of promises made in the shadow of a coffin, of a brother who gave up his most prized link to his mother in order to honor his sibling. To have that legacy disrupted was more than Harry could bear. It reopened old wounds, reignited long-buried resentments, and set the stage for the fury and chaos that would follow. The promise between brothers had once been a shield against the world. But promises are fragile, and even the strongest bonds can crack under the weight of grief, rivalry, and betrayal. That sapphire ring was not just an object. It was the embodiment of that promise. And once it was threatened, everything began to unravel. From the earliest days of her relationship with Prince Harry, Meghan Markle's presence was shadowed by comparisons to the late Princess Diana. Journalists, commentators, and even Harry himself often drew parallels between the two women. Both were outsiders in their own way. Diana as a young woman thrust into the rigid traditions of the monarchy, and Meghan as an American actress stepping into a centuries-old institution. Both were celebrated for their charisma, their ability to connect with ordinary people, and their sense of style that captured headlines almost as often as their humanitarian work. But as flattering as these comparisons may have seemed on the surface, they were double-edged, burdening Meghan with expectations she could never fully meet while also feeding a fascination that she reportedly embraced. For Meghan, Diana was not just Harry's mother. She was an icon, a symbol of empathy and compassion, but also of tragedy. Long before Meghan married into the family, Diana's story had fascinated the world. Meghan herself, by her own admission, knew Diana's history. She had studied her fashion, watched documentaries about her life, and admired her work with vulnerable communities. When Meghan became engaged to Harry, those around her say she understood perfectly well the symbolic role she would inherit. She would not just be Harry's wife, she would inevitably be cast in Diana's shadow. Rather than reject that, Meghan seemed to lean into it. Observers noted how Meghan's wardrobe choices occasionally echoed Diana's famous looks. Certain poses, hand gestures, even public interactions reminded royal watchers of Diana's own mannerisms. Whether intentional or unconscious, these echoes sparked endless discussion in the press. Was Meghan channeling Diana deliberately, or was the media simply eager to frame her as Diana reborn? The truth may lie somewhere in between. Meghan was undoubtedly aware of the resonance Diana carried. To embrace those similarities was to tie herself to a powerful narrative, one of glamour, compassion, and tragedy, that kept her at the center of global attention. At the heart of this fascination was Diana's jewelry. Each piece Diana wore was loaded with meaning, and the public remembered them vividly. Her sapphire ring was the most famous, but she also owned a collection of necklaces, earrings, and bracelets that carried stories of love and loss. Meghan, like Kate before her, wore pieces from Diana's collection at key moments. On her wedding day, Meghan was given Diana's aquamarine cocktail ring to wear for the evening reception. It was a gesture filled with symbolism, Harry presenting his new bride with something that once belonged to his mother. For many, this act was touching, a sign that Diana's presence was being honored at the marriage. But it also marked the beginning of Meghan's association with Diana's legacy through her jewelry. To Meghan, wearing Diana's jewels was a way of stepping into history. But to the public, it sometimes came across as calculated. Critics accused Meghan of exploiting Diana's memory to boost her own image. Admirers, however, saw it as a natural continuation of the story, Harry's wife carrying forward Diana's spirit. The reactions were divided, but what cannot be denied is that Meghan understood the power these symbols carried. Diana's jewelry was not just ornamentation. It was a language, a way of communicating with the world without saying a word. Meghan, adept at controlling her public image, seemed to grasp that wearing those pieces allowed her to anchor herself in Diana's narrative. This fascination went beyond appearances. Meghan often referenced Diana indirectly when speaking about her own struggles. She spoke of the difficulties of entering the royal family, of feeling isolated, of being targeted by the press. These themes resonated deeply with those who remembered Diana's battles with the media and the palace. Whether Meghan intended it or not, her words drew inevitable comparisons. For Harry, who had always described Meghan as sharing the same compassion and vulnerability his mother had, this was validating. But for others, it was unsettling. Diana's legacy was still sacred, and to see Meghan stepping so closely into her shadow was, for some, inappropriate. Among insiders, whispers began to circulate that Meghan's admiration for Diana bordered on obsession. She wanted to know everything about Diana's life, her struggles, her fashion, her relationships. Some saw this as a genuine desire to understand the family she had joined. Others viewed it as ambition, a calculated attempt to mold her image around the most beloved royal figure in modern history. After all, Diana's global appeal remained unmatched, even decades after her death. For Meghan, who had spent much of her adult life in Hollywood navigating fame, aligning herself with Diana's memory was a powerful way to ensure relevance. But this fascination carried risks. For one, it unsettled William and Kate. William, fiercely protective of his mother's memory, was said to feel uncomfortable with Meghan's frequent comparisons to Diana. Kate, who already wore the sapphire engagement ring, was naturally seen as the one who embodied Diana's continuity within the royal family. Meghan stepping into that space created tension. The symbolism of Diana's legacy was not just personal. It was political, tied to the monarchy's narrative of continuity. For Meghan to claim too much of it threatened to upset that balance. This brings us to the heart of the controversy over the sapphire ring. For Meghan, Diana's most iconic jewel represented the ultimate link to her legacy. To have it, or even to be associated with it, would cement her place in that story. For Harry, the ring was his most personal connection to his mother, one he had already sacrificed once by giving it to William. To think of Meghan laying claim to it without his full blessing must have struck a deep nerve. To the outside world, it may have seemed like a simple matter of jewelry. But within the family, it symbolized Meghan stepping further into Diana's legacy, perhaps too far. The public perception of Meghan has always been shaped by this fascination with Diana. Supporters argue that Meghan has every right to embrace her husband's mother's memory, to wear her jewels, to honor her life. Critics, however, claim Meghan exploited Diana's image, using it as a shield against criticism and as a way to elevate her own position. In this debate lies the complexity of Meghan's role. She could not escape Diana's shadow, and she did not try to. Instead, she appeared to weave herself into it, for better or worse. The fascination with Diana also played into Harry's own feelings. Harry often said Meghan reminded him of his mother, a woman with the same empathy and courage. For him, this was perhaps one of the reasons he fell in love with her. But it also created expectations Meghan could never fully live up to. Diana was not just a person, she was an icon, a myth, a ghost haunting every corner of the palace. To be compared to her was both a blessing and a curse. Meghan, willingly or not, stepped into that space, carrying the weight of those comparisons wherever she went. This chapter of the story reveals the foundation for the chaos that would later unfold. Meghan's fascination with Diana's legacy was not inherently wrong, but it was complicated. It was genuine admiration mixed with ambition, love mixed with calculation, grief mixed with image building. It put her at odds with those who believed Diana's memory should be handled with reverence, not appropriated. And it positioned her in direct conflict with the delicate promise between Harry and William, centered on Diana's sapphire ring. When Meghan allegedly laid claim to that ring, it was not seen in isolation. It was viewed through the lens of years of fascination, comparisons, and whispers that she was determined to step into Diana's shoes. For Harry, who had always carried the private scars of giving up the ring, this was intolerable. For William, it was an intrusion into a memory he guarded fiercely. For Meghan, it may have felt like a natural extension of her role as Harry's wife. But for the monarchy, and for the world watching, it was the moment admiration became controversy, fascination became scandal, and legacy became chaos. The whispers began quietly, as they always do in royal circles. At first, it was nothing more than a suggestion, a murmur that Meghan had come into possession of an item that was never meant to be hers. The sapphire ring, Diana's most famous jewel, the one tied to Harry's grief and William's legacy, had allegedly found its way into Meghan's hands. Whether she deliberately took it, was given it, or simply wore it at a private moment remained unclear. But in a family where every object carries layers of symbolism, the very possibility was enough to trigger a storm. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must remember that royal jewelry is never truly private. Each piece carries a story, a lineage, a meaning. Diana's sapphire was not only a ring but a relic of memory and promise, one that represented both unity and sacrifice between the brothers. Meghan's act, whether intentional or not, was immediately interpreted as a violation of that sacred boundary. For some, it was seen as boldness. For others, it was betrayal. For Harry, it was the spark that ignited rage. Accounts vary on how it happened. Some say Meghan discovered the ring among personal belongings that Harry kept tucked away, perhaps in a drawer or a jewelry case hidden from the public eye. Others suggest it was given to her temporarily, perhaps as a gesture of intimacy from Harry, only for her to claim it more permanently. There are even whispers that Meghan sought it out deliberately, aware of its symbolic power. Each version of the story adds a layer of intrigue, but they all converge on one undeniable truth. Meghan ended up with the ring, and Harry was not prepared for the consequences. Insiders paint the scene vividly. Imagine Harry walking into a room to find Meghan wearing the sapphire, the same stone he once cradled in his palm as a boy grieving his mother. To him, this was not just jewelry. It was a vessel of memory, something he had already given up once when he allowed William to use it for Kate's engagement. To see it now on Meghan, without his consent or full knowledge, would have been like reopening an old wound with fresh salt. The sight must have hit him like a thunderclap, a collision of past and present, love and loss, loyalty and betrayal. From Meghan's perspective, the act may not have carried the same weight. For her, the sapphire represented connection, belonging, and legitimacy within a family that had never fully accepted her. Wearing Diana's ring could have been her way of anchoring herself within the story, proving that she too was part of Diana's legacy. In her eyes, it may have been homage rather than theft, continuity rather than violation. But in the charged atmosphere of royal life, intent matters less than perception, and the perception was catastrophic. Behind closed doors, The confrontation that followed was said to be explosive. Harry, usually measured in his public appearances, reportedly erupted in fury. He demanded to know why Meghan had taken the ring, why she would dare touch something so sacred without his permission. The argument spiraled, dredging up old grievances about image, loyalty, and respect for his mother's memory. Meghan, never one to back down, defended herself passionately, insisting she meant no harm. But the damage was done. To Harry, the line had been crossed. What made the act so volatile was not simply that Meghan had taken the ring, but what it represented. For years, Harry had felt overshadowed, overlooked, and misunderstood within his family. Giving up the sapphire to William had been one of the most painful sacrifices of his life. To now see Meghan, his own wife, crossing into that same territory, was to relive that sense of loss all over again. It was as if the one piece of Diana he had clung to was being taken from him a second time, first by duty, then by love. The ripple effects of this private drama quickly spread. Those within the household who caught wind of it were shocked. Servants talk, and whispers travel fast in palaces where discretion is supposed to be the rule. Soon, members of the extended family were aware of the tension. For William and Kate, the news was particularly galling. William had always considered himself the guardian of Diana's public legacy, while Harry carried the private grief. Meghan's act blurred those boundaries, threatening to upend the delicate balance that had kept the brothers connected despite their differences. Kate, who had worn the sapphire engagement ring for years, could only watch as the narrative shifted. If Meghan was now seen with the same ring, what would that imply? The media, ever hungry for scandal, eventually caught wind of the whispers. Though the details remained murky, reports began to surface of jewel disputes and family heirlooms caught in royal crossfire. The tabloids had a field day, speculating on whether Meghan had stolen the ring outright or whether Harry had gifted it to her in a moment of weakness. Headlines screamed about Diana's ghost haunting the Sussex marriage, about the sapphire curse, about Meghan overstepping yet again. Each article fanned the flames, pushing the private conflict further into public consciousness. The symbolism of Meghan's act cannot be overstated. In royal families, heirlooms are not simply possessions. They are markers of power, identity, and belonging. To wear Diana's sapphire was to claim a place in her story, to step into her shadow in a way that would inevitably be compared to Kate. For Meghan, already under constant scrutiny, it was the most dangerous territory she could enter. To critics, it looked like ambition. To supporters, it looked like courage. To Harry, it looked like betrayal. This moment also marked a turning point in their marriage. Up until then, Harry had defended Meghan fiercely against criticism, often standing against his family and the press to protect her. But the ring forced him into an impossible position. How could he defend Meghan while feeling, deep down, that she had wronged him? The conflict was no longer between Meghan and the monarchy, or Meghan and the press. It was between Meghan and Harry himself. That shift changed everything. The frenzy spread beyond Britain. International media picked up the story, each outlet tailoring it to their own audience. In the United States, Meghan was defended more vigorously, with commentators suggesting the British press was once again targeting her unfairly. In Europe, the scandal was analyzed through the lens of monarchy versus modernity, with Meghan cast as a disruptive force challenging outdated traditions. On social media, the debate was relentless. Hashtags like #SapphireGate and #Meghan versus Diana trended for days, with millions of users weighing in. Some shared side-by-side images of Meghan and Diana, claiming Meghan was trying to replace her. Others argued Harry's anger was proof that the story had struck a raw nerve. What made the media frenzy so damaging was its ability to reduce complex emotions into simple narratives. Harry's grief, Meghan's admiration, William's protectiveness, Kate's discomfort, all were flattened into a single scandalous storyline. Meghan stole Diana's ring. This simplification not only distorted the truth, but also ensured the story had lasting power. Every time Meghan appeared in public, commentators asked whether she was wearing the sapphire. Every time Harry looked tense, the ring scandal was mentioned. The frenzy turned a private family dispute into a global obsession. The press also exploited the scandal to reignite old narratives. Meghan was once again labeled an outsider, an American who never understood the rules of the monarchy. Harry was painted as weak, unable to control his wife or his emotions. William and Kate were depicted as the stable, dutiful couple upholding Diana's memory with dignity. The contrast was intentional, reinforcing the divide between the two brothers and their wives. By framing the Sussexes as reckless and the Cambridges as steady, the media fed into the broader narrative of rivalry that had captivated the public since Meghan's arrival. The frenzy had real consequences for the family's public image. The monarchy has always relied on carefully managed symbolism to maintain its authority. Diana's sapphire was one of the most potent symbols in their arsenal, representing continuity between past and present. To see it dragged into a scandal undermined that symbolism. Public opinion began to shift, with polls showing declining trust in Harry and Meghan. Some members of the public, once sympathetic to their struggles, began to view them as chaotic and self-destructive. The monarchy, already under scrutiny in the modern era, was forced to contend with yet another blow to its image. Behind palace walls, the family struggled to contain the damage. Public relations teams scrambled to issue statements that were vague enough to defuse speculation, but firm enough to maintain dignity. Official spokespeople denied that Meghan had stolen anything, but their careful wording only fueled suspicion. The lack of clarity allowed the press to keep the story alive, speculating endlessly about what was really happening behind the scenes. Silence, intended as damage control, instead became gasoline for the fire. Meghan herself became increasingly isolated as the frenzy grew. Friends reported that she felt hunted, trapped in the same cycle of harassment that Diana had endured decades earlier. She saw the same headlines, the same invasive photographs, the same narratives of villainy. For Meghan, the scandal confirmed what she had long feared, that no matter what she did, she would never be accepted. Harry, meanwhile, grew more embittered, lashing out privately at the press and retreating further from his family. The frenzy did not just damage their public image, it deepened the fractures within their marriage and their relationship with the royals. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the media frenzy was its echo of the past. Diana herself had been consumed by the press, her every move scrutinized and sensationalized. Now, her memory was being used to torment her son and vilify his wife. The cycle had repeated itself, proving Harry's worst fears true. The frenzy was not just about a ring. It was about history repeating, about the press once again feasting on the pain of the people it claimed to celebrate. As the headlines continued, the story took on a life of its own. It was no longer about what had actually happened, but about what it represented. Meghan was cast as a symbol of disruption, Harry as a symbol of grief, William and Kate as symbols of continuity. The sapphire ring became the centerpiece of this drama, an object that carried more meaning than any words could convey. The frenzy ensured that the scandal would not fade quickly. It had become part of the ongoing saga of the royal family, another chapter in a story that the world could not look away from. By the time the dust began to settle, the damage was irreversible. The media had cemented the narrative, shaping public perception in ways that would linger for years. Harry and Meghan, once seen as a modernizing force for the monarchy, were now framed as chaotic and divisive. The frenzy had achieved its purpose. It had sold papers, fueled debates, and captivated the world. But in doing so, it had deepened the wounds of a family already struggling to hold itself together. The sapphire scandal was no longer just a private dispute. It had become a media circus, one that exposed the monarchy's vulnerabilities and forced Harry and Meghan into an even harsher spotlight. For Harry, it was a painful reminder that the press would never let him escape his mother's shadow. For Meghan, it was proof that she would always be cast as the villain. And for the monarchy, it was another blow to an image already battered by years of scandal. The frenzy showed that in the modern age, no royal scandal remains private. Every whisper becomes a headline, every argument a global story. And in this case, the frenzy ensured that Diana's sapphire ring, once a symbol of love and continuity, would forever be remembered as the centerpiece of chaos. In the heart of every monarchy lies a set of symbols that carry far more weight than their material value. Crowns, thrones, portraits, jewels. These objects serve as anchors of continuity, binding the present to the past and giving the public a sense of shared history. Among all these, few objects hold as much power as heirlooms that belong to beloved figures. Diana's sapphire ring was not just a piece of jewelry. It was the embodiment of a legacy. When Meghan allegedly took possession of it, the act was perceived not as a personal choice, but as a symbolic challenge, as if she were claiming ownership of Diana's memory itself. Symbols operate in ways both visible and invisible. On the surface, the sapphire ring was beautiful, a deep blue stone surrounded by diamonds, dazzling on any finger. But beneath that beauty lay the story of Diana's life, her marriage, her struggles, and her enduring appeal. When the world looked at the ring, they didn't just see a sapphire, they saw Diana herself. They saw the fairy tale of her engagement, the heartbreak of her marriage, the resilience of her spirit. For Harry and William, the symbolism was even more personal. To them, it was a piece of their mother they could still touch, a reminder of the warmth they had lost. When Meghan took the ring, intentionally or not, she stepped into this web of symbolism. To her, it may have been an act of connection, a way to feel closer to the mother-in-law she never met, to honor Diana's memory by carrying her legacy forward. But symbols are not owned by individuals. They are owned by stories, and stories are owned by the public. The perception of Meghan wearing the sapphire was not simply that of a wife honoring her husband's mother. It was seen as an outsider laying claim to something sacred, as if she were rewriting history to place herself at the center of it. Experts in psychology often speak of the power objects hold in processing grief. After the loss of a loved one, small keepsakes, a ring, a watch, a piece of clothing, become vessels of memory. They give the grieving something to hold on to, a tangible reminder of the person who is gone. For Harry, Diana's sapphire was precisely that. It was the object he had chosen as a boy when forced to say goodbye to his mother. It was his anchor in the storm of loss. To see Meghan with it was, therefore, more than just unsettling. It was as though his grief had been stolen, his memory disrupted, his legacy appropriated. This is why the scandal transcended the realm of personal disputes. It tapped into the archetypal tension between inheritance and intrusion, between legacy and appropriation. In the monarchy, inheritance is sacred. Every crown, every jewel, every title is passed down with care, symbolizing continuity from one generation to the next. Meghan's alleged act disrupted that continuity. It was perceived as a break in the chain, a moment when legacy was no longer passed but taken. That narrative, whether true or exaggerated, was what made the story so explosive. Public reaction reflected the intensity of this symbolism. Many saw Meghan as attempting to position herself as Diana's successor, not just in fashion or humanitarian work, but in ownership of her most treasured possession. To Diana's admirers, this felt like trespass, as if someone had entered a shrine uninvited. Others, however, defended Meghan, arguing that as Harry's wife, she had every right to share in his inheritance, every right to embrace the legacy of the woman who shaped him. The debate was not about jewelry. It was about ownership of memory, about who had the right to define Diana's legacy. The symbolism extended beyond Diana herself. Within the monarchy, objects like the sapphire ring serve as signals of belonging. Kate wearing the ring reinforced her role as the future queen, the custodian of Diana's memory within the institution. Meghan wearing it, by contrast, signaled something disruptive. It challenged the established order, suggesting that Diana's legacy could be claimed outside the lines of succession, outside the narrative the monarchy had carefully crafted. For the institution, this was dangerous. The monarchy depends on symbols to maintain its legitimacy. If those symbols are destabilized, the institution itself is shaken. Historians noted the parallels with other moments in royal history where objects became contested. Crowns, jewels, and thrones have always been flashpoints for power struggles. The sapphire ring, while smaller in scale, carried the same symbolic weight. It was not just about who wore it, but about what story it told. Kate wearing it told the story of continuity, Diana's memory living on in the future queen. Meghan wearing it told a different story, Diana's memory being claimed by a woman who stood outside the monarchy's carefully drawn lines. That clash of stories was at the heart of the chaos. For Harry, the symbolism was deeply personal. He saw the ring as part of the promise between brothers, a promise forged in grief. He had given it up once, but the act had been sacred, an offering to William in honor of Diana. Meghan's act, intentional or not, broke that sacredness. It suggested that the ring could be passed not through promises, but through possession, not through love, but through assertion. That inversion of meaning was unbearable to him. It was not just a personal betrayal. It was a desecration of something he held sacred. The symbolism also highlighted the tension between private memory and public narrative. For Harry, Diana was his mother. For the world, she was an icon. The sapphire ring existed at the intersection of those two perspectives. To Harry, it was intimate. To the public, it was symbolic. Meghan wearing it blurred those boundaries, collapsing private grief into public spectacle. It turned Harry's most intimate memory into fodder for debate, stripping it of privacy and turning it into performance. That was the true theft, not of the ring itself, but of the sanctity of memory. In this way, the scandal revealed the fragility of legacy. Diana's story, though immortalized in photographs, films, and books, remains contested. Everyone wants to claim her sons, her admirers, the monarchy, even the media that once hounded her. Meghan's alleged act was simply the latest chapter in this contest. But because it involved a physical object, a sapphire ring that the world could see and recognize, the symbolism was magnified. It made the abstract battle over Diana's memory tangible, visible, undeniable. What this chapter makes clear is that legacy is not just inherited, it is fought over. Meghan's fascination with Diana, combined with her act of taking the sapphire, placed her in direct conflict with the monarchy's narrative of continuity and with Harry's personal sense of loss. It turned a jewel into a battlefield, a ring into a war of symbols. And it showed, with painful clarity, how fragile legacies become when they are claimed by too many hands. In the end, the symbolism of the sapphire ring was not about fashion or possession. It was about grief, identity, and power. It was about who gets to tell Diana's story, who gets to wear her memory, and who gets to claim her legacy. For Harry, the answer was clear. It was not Meghan. For Meghan, the answer was equally clear. As Harry's wife, she had every right. That clash of perspectives ensured the symbolism of stolen legacy would haunt not only their marriage, but the monarchy itself for years to come. When the accusations reached their fever pitch, Meghan knew she could not remain silent forever. The whispers had turned into headlines, the headlines into debates, and soon enough, the sapphire ring controversy had spiraled into a defining scandal of her life. To the public, she was being cast as the usurper of Diana's legacy, the outsider who dared to take what was not hers. But Meghan, never one to accept vilification without a fight, began to craft her defense. She understood better than most that in the court of public opinion, silence can sometimes be more damning than the harshest rebuttal. Meghan's defense began with framing her intentions. To those close to her, she insisted that her actions were never about theft or disrespect. To Meghan, wearing Diana's sapphire ring was an act of honor, a way of embracing the woman who had shaped Harry's life and, by extension, her own. She argued that she was paying tribute, not laying claim. After all, she reasoned, she was Harry's wife, the mother of his children, and part of Diana's family legacy by marriage. Why should it be seen as inappropriate for her to wear something that represented her mother-in-law's memory? This line of defense resonated with some of her supporters. They argued that Meghan, far from being an interloper, was entitled to share in Diana's legacy. They pointed out that Kate wore Diana's sapphire engagement ring every day without controversy, yet when Meghan touched something similar, she was condemned. For them, the double standard was glaring. Meghan's defenders emphasized that the issue was less about Diana's memory and more about the public's bias against Meghan herself. If the same act had been done by another royal, they argued, it would have been celebrated. But Meghan also knew she could not ignore Harry's rage. In private, she attempted to explain herself to him, to soothe the wound she had unintentionally reopened. She insisted that she had not meant to undermine his grief or disrespect his bond with his mother. She claimed that her gesture was rooted in love, for Diana, for Harry, and for the family they were building together. Meghan, who had always struggled with the perception that she was an outsider, saw the ring as a way of anchoring herself within the royal story. By wearing it, she believed she was connecting herself and her children to Diana's legacy, ensuring that they, too, would not be excluded from the memory that defined Harry's life. Still, Meghan's defense was complicated by her history with the press. For years, she had been accused of carefully curating her image, of making decisions not out of spontaneity, but with an eye toward optics. To her critics, her defense sounded hollow, another calculated move designed to shift the narrative. They argued that Meghan knew exactly what she was doing, that wearing Diana's sapphire was not about tribute but about power. They pointed out that she had often been compared to Diana, sometimes even by Harry himself, and that she had leaned into those comparisons. To them, the ring was not homage but appropriation. Meghan, however, remained steadfast. She began to share stories of how much she admired Diana, of how she had studied her life and felt inspired by her courage. In interviews and conversations, she subtly drew parallels between Diana's struggles and her own. Both women, she suggested, had been outsiders targeted by the institution and the press. Both had fought to carve out their own identities within a rigid system. By aligning herself with Diana, Meghan reframed the narrative. She was not stealing a legacy. She was continuing it. Her defense also leaned on her role as a mother. Meghan argued that she wanted Archie and Lilibet to know their grandmother's story, to feel connected to her memory. For her, the sapphire was not a possession but a bridge, a way to bring Diana into the lives of children who would never meet her. In Meghan's view, wearing the ring was less about herself and more about her family. It was an attempt to preserve a connection that otherwise risked fading with time. But even as Meghan defended herself, the cracks in her marriage widened. Harry struggled to accept her reasoning. To him, the sapphire was not a symbol to be used for connection. It was a sacred relic tied to his grief. Meghan's defense, while heartfelt, did not erase the fact that she had acted without his blessing. The tension between them deepened, with Harry torn between his love for Meghan and his loyalty to his mother's memory. Meghan, frustrated, felt misunderstood. She saw herself as unfairly maligned, both by the press and by her own husband. In her eyes, she was being punished for trying to honor Diana, for trying to fit into a family that had never truly accepted her. The public remained divided. Meghan's supporters rallied around her defense, emphasizing the unfair scrutiny she faced compared to other royals. They argued that her intentions had been twisted, that she was demonized simply because she was Meghan. Her critics, meanwhile, remained unmoved. They saw her defense as opportunistic, an attempt to reframe a selfish act as something noble. The debate raged on, fueled by endless media coverage and social media discourse. What made Meghan's defense so striking was its emphasis on intent versus perception. Meghan insisted that her intent was pure, that she sought to honor Diana. But perception is often more powerful than intent, especially in the monarchy. In the world of royal symbolism, even the smallest gesture can be loaded with meaning. Meghan underestimated the weight of that symbolism, or perhaps she believed she could reshape it. Either way, her defense, however genuine, could not erase the perception that she had crossed a line. Meghan's defense also revealed a deeper truth about her role in the royal family. From the moment she married Harry, she had been cast as both a disruptor and an outsider. Every action she took was scrutinized, every decision dissected. In that context, even an act meant as tribute was bound to be seen as transgression. The sapphire scandal was not just about the ring. It was about Meghan's place in the monarchy, about whether she would ever be accepted as part of the family or forever remain on its margins. Ultimately, Meghan's defense did little to resolve the chaos. The scandal had already taken on a life of its own, feeding the media, dividing the public, and straining her marriage. Her words could not undo the perception, nor could they heal the wound it had inflicted on Harry. But her defense does reveal the complexity of her position. Meghan was not simply a villain or a victim. She was a woman navigating impossible expectations, trying to honor a legacy while also carving out her own. Her defense, whether convincing or not, was her attempt to reclaim control of a narrative that had slipped beyond her grasp. In the end, Meghan's defense highlights the central tension of the sapphire scandal, the clash between love and legacy, between intent and perception, between private grief and public symbolism. Meghan insisted she was paying tribute. Harry felt she was trespassing. The world, watching from the outside, saw only chaos. And it is in that chaos that the scandal became not just about a ring, but about the struggle for identity, memory, and belonging in a family that lives under the unrelenting gaze of the world. Isolation is not always about being physically alone. Sometimes it is the feeling of standing in a crowded room yet being unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. For Prince Harry, the sapphire scandal did more than reopen old wounds. It pushed him into an emotional isolation unlike anything he had experienced before. He had already distanced himself from the royal family by stepping away from his duties, yet the controversy surrounding Meghan and Diana's sapphire ring severed the fragile threads of connection that still bound him to his past. What remained was a man caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, consumed by grief and betrayal. In the days following the confrontation with Meghan, Harry reportedly withdrew into himself. Friends noticed a change in his demeanor. He became quieter, more guarded, spending long hours alone, replaying events in his mind. The image of Meghan with the ring haunted him, not because of its beauty, but because of the memories it carried. To Harry, the sapphire was not just a gemstone. It was his childhood grief made tangible, the one object he had clung to when his mother was ripped away. To now see it at the center of chaos made him feel like his most private pain had been violated. Isolation deepened because Harry could not confide in anyone. With William, communication had broken down entirely. Every attempt at conversation turned into accusation, leaving both brothers more bitter than before. With his father, Charles, the relationship was no better. Harry had never felt truly understood by him, and now, after years of interviews and revelations that cast Charles in a harsh light, there was little chance of reconciliation. Even with friends, Harry hesitated. Many of his old confidants had remained in Britain, still close to William, and Harry feared that anything he shared would find its way back to the palace or the press. That left Meghan, but she, too, had become a source of pain. The woman he had once seen as his refuge was now part of the conflict. Though Meghan defended herself, Harry struggled to accept her explanations. Each time he looked at her, he could not help but remember the ring. Their conversations grew strained, marked by long silences or sharp words. Harry loved her deeply, but love could not silence the echo of betrayal he felt. And so he found himself more alone than ever, unable to turn to his family, hesitant to turn to his friends, and conflicted about turning to his wife. This isolation was not new to Harry. It had shadowed him since his childhood. After Diana's death, he often spoke of feeling like no one understood his pain. William had been his closest companion, but even then, Harry admitted that they grieved differently, leaving him feeling detached. As he grew older, the sense of being the spare, the one always in the shadow of the heir, compounded his loneliness. His time in the military gave him camaraderie, but even that faded once he returned to royal life. Stepping away from the monarchy with Meghan had seemed like a chance to finally escape isolation, to build a new world where he belonged. But now, in the aftermath of the sapphire scandal, he realized that the loneliness had followed him, rooted not in his surroundings, but in his soul. The media frenzy only heightened this sense of isolation. Every headline reminded him that the world was watching, judging, laughing at his pain. Paparazzi photographs of Meghan were dissected for any sign of the sapphire, every gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. Harry felt hunted, trapped in the same cycle that had consumed his mother. But unlike Diana, he had no family to rally around him, no shared grief to hold him together. He felt exposed, alone against a world that seemed determined to strip him of dignity. Isolation also came from his role as a father. Harry had always promised himself that his children would never suffer the way he had, that he would protect Archie and Lilibet from the media's relentless gaze. But as the scandal grew, he began to fear that he had already failed. Every negative story about Meghan, every speculation about the sapphire, cast a shadow over their family. He worried that one day his children would read the headlines, that they would see him not as a protector, but as a man unable to shield them from chaos. That fear deepened his despair, isolating him further from hope. At times, Harry's isolation turned inward, fueling self-doubt. He questioned his decisions, leaving the royal family, moving to California, standing against the monarchy. Had he been too impulsive? Had he placed too much faith in the idea that he could build a life free from royal expectations? These questions gnawed at him in the silence of his private moments. The sapphire scandal was just one event, but to Harry, it symbolized something larger. The possibility that no matter what he did, he would never escape the shadows of his past. Isolation also changed how Harry related to Meghan. He had always been fiercely protective of her, seeing her as someone targeted by the same forces that had destroyed his mother. But now, for the first time, he felt like she had joined those forces. He could not reconcile his love for her with the pain she had caused him. That inner conflict left him emotionally paralyzed, unable to fully embrace her or fully let go of his anger. Meghan, sensing his withdrawal, felt abandoned. Their arguments became cycles of blame and defense, neither truly hearing the other. Isolation was no longer just Harry's burden. It became a shadow over their marriage. Those who observed Harry during this time described a man adrift, caught between the need to fight and the urge to retreat. Some days he would rage against the press, furious at their cruelty. Other days he would withdraw completely, avoiding calls, refusing interviews, disappearing into silence. The contrast revealed the depth of his struggle. He was a man without a clear path, torn between past and present, unable to find solid ground. In many ways, Harry's isolation was the culmination of years of unresolved grief. Diana's death had left him with wounds that never truly healed, and the sapphire ring was the embodiment of that wound. By becoming the center of a scandal, the ring forced Harry to confront all the pain he had buried. But rather than finding healing, he found himself drowning in it. Isolation was the price of that confrontation, the realization that no one, not even Meghan, could fully share or understand his grief. The irony of Harry's isolation is that it mirrored Diana's own. She, too, had often spoken of feeling alone within the palace walls, surrounded by people, yet misunderstood. Harry had always feared repeating his mother's fate, yet in his isolation, he found himself walking a similar path. The parallels were painful, and they only deepened his sense of despair. For Harry, the sapphire scandal was not just about a ring. It was about history repeating itself, about the loneliness that came with being Diana's son, about the curse of legacy that bound him no matter where he went. In the end, Harry's isolation was not just a personal struggle, it was a symbol of the monarchy's failure. The institution that claimed to stand for family had left one of its members feeling utterly alone. The sapphire scandal exposed that isolation, forcing Harry to confront truths he had long avoided. He was not just a prince. He was a son still grieving, a husband torn by conflict, a father fearful for his children, and above all, a man trapped in the isolation of his own pain. When news of the sapphire scandal broke beyond the palace walls and into the public sphere, it was as though a match had been struck in a room filled with fuel. The British public, already divided on Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life, seized upon the story with an intensity that stunned even seasoned royal commentators. Across breakfast tables, pubs, workplaces, and social media platforms, debates erupted over whether Meghan had crossed a sacred line or whether the family had, once again, scapegoated her unfairly. For many in Britain, Diana remains an untouchable figure. Her memory is not just cherished, it is guarded, almost as if she belongs as much to the people as she did to her family. The sapphire ring, one of the most visible emblems of her life, is woven into that shared memory. To see it caught up in scandal felt, to some, like a personal affront. Newspapers carried impassioned letters from readers who felt betrayed by Meghan's alleged actions. Some wrote that Diana's memory should never be used or played with for personal ambition. Others argued that Harry's rage was entirely justified, that Meghan should have understood the deep wounds such an act would reopen. On the other side, Meghan's supporters pushed back fiercely. They argued that the scandal was being blown out of proportion by a media establishment that had always vilified her. They pointed out the hypocrisy of celebrating Kate's use of Diana's jewelry while condemning Meghan's. For them, this was not about a sapphire ring at all. It was about prejudice, about Meghan being treated differently because she did not fit the traditional mold of a royal. On social media, hashtags like #StandWithMeghan and #DoubleStandard trended alongside the more critical #SapphireGate. The online debates grew heated, often devolving into arguments about race, tradition, and the monarchy's role in modern society. The generational divide in public reaction was striking. Older Britons, who had lived through Diana's engagement and death, tended to view the scandal through the lens of loyalty to Diana's memory. They saw Meghan's alleged possession of the ring as audacious, even sacrilegious. Younger generations, however, many of whom admired Meghan's independence and viewed the monarchy with skepticism, were more sympathetic. To them, Meghan's wearing of the sapphire was a symbol of reclaiming agency, of refusing to be bound by outdated traditions. What one generation saw as theft, another saw as empowerment. The media capitalized on these divisions. Tabloids ran stories designed to inflame anger, with dramatic headlines accusing Meghan of stealing Diana's ghost. Television debates featured royal experts pitted against Meghan's defenders, each side amplifying the intensity of the controversy. The story became less about facts and more about feelings, less about what Meghan did and more about what she represented. Every commentator projected their own narrative onto the ring, turning it into a mirror reflecting the public's hopes, fears, and grievances. Internationally, the reaction was just as polarized. In the United States, where Meghan had a stronger base of support, much of the coverage leaned toward her defense. American outlets framed the scandal as yet another example of the British press unfairly targeting her. Commentators compared her struggles to Diana's, painting her as a modern woman fighting against an archaic system. In Europe, reactions varied, with some outlets criticizing Meghan for insensitivity while others criticized the monarchy for clinging to symbols rather than addressing more pressing issues. Public reaction was not just confined to words, it manifested in actions. Protesters appeared outside royal residences with signs both condemning and supporting Meghan. Some held posters of Diana with slogans like, "Her memory is not yours." Others carried placards reading, "Meghan is family too." The sapphire scandal, though centered on a single ring, had touched upon broader cultural tensions. Who owns history? Who decides the meaning of legacy? And who has the right to claim belonging in a family that represents an entire nation? For Harry, the public reaction was both validating and tormenting. On one hand, he saw that many sympathized with his pain, recognizing the depth of his grief and the sacredness of his mother's memory. On the other, he was horrified to see his private anguish turned into a spectacle, debated on television and mocked in tabloids. He had always hated the intrusion of the press, and now the public itself seemed to have become part of the intrusion, dissecting his marriage and his mother's memory as if they were entertainment. For Meghan, the reaction was devastating. Though she had defenders, the weight of criticism was crushing. Every newspaper headline seemed to paint her as greedy, ambitious, or tone-deaf. She felt vilified not just by the press, but by segments of the public who seemed unwilling to give her the benefit of the doubt. Meghan, who had once hoped to use her platform to highlight humanitarian causes, now found herself defined by scandal. The sapphire ring had become a symbol of everything she feared: rejection, misunderstanding, and endless judgment. The monarchy itself faced consequences from the public reaction. Polls revealed declining trust in the institution, with many Britons expressing frustration that the family seemed perpetually embroiled in conflict. Some questioned why such emphasis was placed on jewels and heirlooms in the first place, arguing that the monarchy's obsession with symbols revealed its irrelevance in modern society. Others, however, rallied more strongly around William and Kate, seeing them as the stable core of the monarchy in contrast to Harry and Meghan's chaos. The scandal, far from being a trivial distraction, had reignited debates about the monarchy's future and the public's relationship with it. The most profound aspect of the public reaction was how personal it became for so many. Diana had been the people's princess, someone the public felt they truly knew. Her ring, therefore, felt like theirs as much as it did her son's. To see it at the center of a scandal was not just a royal family matter, it was a public matter. The debates were not only about Meghan's actions, but about what Diana meant to Britain and the world. The sapphire scandal became a proxy war over her legacy, with each side claiming to protect her memory while accusing the other of exploiting it. As the debates raged on, the scandal began to feel less like a fleeting headline and more like a cultural reckoning. It revealed the depth of the public's attachment to Diana, the fragility of Harry and Meghan's public image, and the monarchy's inability to control the narrative. It showed that symbols, once unleashed into the public imagination, cannot be contained. They take on lives of their own, shaped by the feelings of millions. In the end, the public reaction ensured that the sapphire scandal would not fade quietly. It became etched into the ongoing story of Harry and Meghan, another chapter that defined how the world saw them. For some, Meghan would forever be the woman who dared to touch Diana's legacy. For others, she would be the victim of an unfair double standard. For Harry, the public reaction only deepened his isolation, reminding him that his private grief was no longer his own. It belonged to the world now, and the world would never stop debating it. Scandals within the royal family have always followed a predictable rhythm. A rumor breaks, the press circles like vultures, the palace issues a carefully worded statement, and the story either fades or becomes enshrined as part of royal lore. But the sapphire scandal did not follow this rhythm. Instead, it escalated in ways that nobody could have anticipated. What began as whispers of Meghan's alleged claim to Diana's ring grew into open conflict, dividing not only the family but also the public, and transforming a single piece of jewelry into a battlefield of loyalty, legacy, and power. The escalation began inside the palace walls. Once the story leaked to the press, it was no longer just an argument between Harry and Meghan. It became an institutional issue, one that the monarchy itself had to address. Advisors urged Charles to intervene, but he hesitated. He knew any involvement from him would only magnify the scandal, drawing attention to the family's dysfunction. Yet his silence was interpreted as weakness, and whispers within court circles suggested he was losing control of his sons. Every attempt at managing the scandal privately failed, as details kept seeping to the press through unnamed insiders, each leak fueling new headlines. Harry's fury also escalated. At first, it was confined to arguments behind closed doors. But as the press coverage intensified, his anger turned outward. He lashed out not only at Meghan but at the institution that he believed had once again failed to protect him. In conversations with friends, he reportedly spoke of betrayal on all sides. The sapphire had become, in his mind, a symbol of everything wrong with his life. The press that hounded him, the monarchy that suffocated him, and even the marriage that had once been his sanctuary. His pain, already raw, now felt weaponized. Every new article, every mocking headline, was like a fresh wound. For Meghan, the escalation took on a different form. Determined not to be cast as the villain, she began to fight back, both privately and through subtle public gestures. In carefully chosen interviews and appearances, she emphasized her admiration for Diana, painting herself as someone who wanted to honor, not usurp, her legacy. But each time she spoke, her words were twisted by the tabloids into further evidence of her ambition. If she stayed silent, she was accused of guilt. If she spoke, she was accused of manipulation. There was no winning, and the pressure only pushed her further into defensive mode. The media, recognizing the story's staying power, poured fuel on the fire. They began framing the scandal as a war between Meghan and Kate. Photos of the two women were plastered across magazines, contrasted to highlight differences in demeanor, dress, and public image. Kate was portrayed as dignified and respectful, the true custodian of Diana's memory, while Meghan was cast as disruptive and self-serving. This narrative, though simplistic and often unfair, was effective. It amplified the sense of rivalry, making the scandal not just about a ring, but about the future of the monarchy itself. William, furious over the public humiliation, took a harder stance. He made no secret of his disapproval, and his anger toward Harry deepened. Private conversations between the brothers, once rare, became impossible. Every word was tinged with bitterness, every silence heavy with resentment. For William, Meghan's actions were proof that Harry had lost his way, that his marriage was tearing the family apart. For Harry, William's judgment only reinforced his sense of betrayal. What had once been a bond forged in grief was now consumed by conflict. Kate, caught in the middle, bore the weight of comparison. She continued to wear the sapphire engagement ring, as she always had, but now every public appearance with it was scrutinized. The ring, once a symbol of her marriage, had become a lightning rod. Was she flaunting it in response to Meghan? Was she trying to reassert her claim to Diana's legacy? The questions were endless, and though Kate maintained her composure, the pressure was immense. Even her silence was interpreted as a statement. The escalation also revealed itself in the public's reaction. Protests outside Buckingham Palace grew louder, with rival groups clashing over Meghan's place in the royal family. Some carried banners accusing her of desecrating Diana's memory, while others defended her as a modern woman unfairly persecuted. Talk shows hosted heated debates, and social media descended into endless battles. Hashtags trended daily, turning the scandal into a global phenomenon. The sapphire ring had ceased to be a jewel. It was now a symbol of division, a rallying point for larger cultural wars about tradition, race, gender, and modernity. Behind the scenes, the scandal strained the monarchy's machinery. Advisors scrambled to prevent further leaks, but the damage was already done. Some argued that a firm statement should be issued, clarifying the status of the ring and condemning false reports. Others feared that any official acknowledgement would give the story more weight. The paralysis only allowed the scandal to fester. The longer the palace stayed silent, the louder the speculation became. The monarchy's inability to manage the crisis exposed its vulnerability, showing the world that even an institution built on centuries of tradition could be destabilized by a single family conflict. The escalation reached its peak when reports surfaced that Harry and Meghan's arguments over the ring had turned so volatile that separation was being whispered in their inner circle. Though neither confirmed it, the suggestion alone was enough to spark a frenzy. The press speculated endlessly about divorce, about custody battles, about what would happen to Diana's legacy if Harry and Meghan split. Commentators framed the ring as the symbol that could end their marriage, the object that revealed irreconcilable differences. Whether true or not, the narrative stuck, adding another explosive layer to the scandal. For Harry, the sense of war was inescapable. He felt surrounded, attacked by the press, judged by his family, misunderstood by the public, and betrayed by his wife. His isolation deepened into anger, and his anger began to consume him. For Meghan, the war was one of perception. She fought desperately to control the narrative, to push back against accusations, to remind the world that her intentions had been pure. But the more she fought, the more entrenched the opposition became. And for William and Kate, the war was about preservation, preserving Diana's memory, preserving the monarchy's image, preserving their own dignity in the face of chaos. The sapphire scandal, in escalating into war, revealed a painful truth. Symbols can unite, but they can also divide. Diana's sapphire, once a symbol of love and continuity, had become a weapon wielded by all sides in a battle over identity and legacy. It was no longer just a ring. It was a fault line, splitting a family, shaking an institution, and dividing a nation. By the time the scandal reached this stage, there was no easy resolution left. The war had taken on a life of its own, feeding on pain, anger, and symbolism. Even if Meghan returned the ring, even if Harry forgave her, even if the palace issued clarifications, the damage was done. The world had already chosen its sides, and the sapphire would forever be remembered not just as Diana's ring, but as the jewel that turned love into chaos and family into war. The British monarchy has always relied on symbols to survive. Thrones, crowns, palaces, carriages. These are not simply relics of history, but tools of continuity, reassuring the public that the institution stands firm despite the passage of time. Among these, jewels hold a particularly potent role. They are passed down like torches, carrying the stories of those who wore them before. Diana's sapphire ring is one such jewel, and its scandal did not just affect Harry and Meghan. It shook the monarchy itself, reopening questions about its future and its relevance in the modern world. To understand the impact, one must first consider the monarchy's delicate position in recent decades. Queen Elizabeth II embodied stability, her reign defined by constancy and restraint. Her passing left Charles with the monumental task of maintaining public trust at a time when the monarchy is scrutinized more than ever. In this environment, every misstep is magnified, every symbol scrutinized. Diana's sapphire, already a cultural relic, became the latest battleground. For the monarchy, the scandal was not merely about family drama. It was about survival. The ring's symbolism ties directly into the monarchy's narrative of continuity. When William gave it to Kate, the story was clear. Diana's legacy lived on in the future queen. It was a gesture designed to unify the public's affection for Diana with the institution's future, blending private grief with public symbolism. Kate wearing the ring told a story of stability, tradition, and respectful remembrance. But when Meghan allegedly laid claim to it, that narrative fractured. Suddenly, the symbol no longer reinforced unity. It revealed division. The monarchy thrives on unity, at least in appearance. It cannot afford open conflicts that expose the family's fractures. But the sapphire scandal did exactly that. It pitted brother against brother, sister-in-law against sister-in-law, and turned Diana's memory into a contested space. The monarchy, which depends on controlling its symbols, found one of its most powerful icons slipping out of its grasp. Instead of reinforcing continuity, the ring now highlighted chaos. Historians and royal commentators were quick to note the danger. They reminded the public of past instances when jewels carried political meaning. Queen Victoria's use of diamonds reinforced empire. Edward VIII's abdication crisis was symbolized by gifts to Wallis Simpson. Even Elizabeth II's coronation crown was carefully chosen to project strength. In each case, jewels were not mere adornments, but messages. Diana's sapphire was no different. When Kate wore it, the message was continuity. When Meghan was associated with it, the message became rebellion, rivalry, and uncertainty. For Charles, this was particularly problematic. He has long carried the burden of being seen as the man who hurt Diana, the man whose choices contributed to her unhappiness. His reign depends on separating himself from that narrative, on presenting the monarchy as modern and forward-looking. But the sapphire scandal dragged Diana's ghost back into the spotlight, reminding the public of old wounds. The monarchy's attempt to move on was undone by a single jewel. Charles's silence, meant to contain the scandal, only deepened suspicion that the monarchy could not control its own narrative. Camilla's presence complicated matters further. Though she has worked tirelessly to reshape her image, for many she will always be linked to Diana's pain. In this context, the sapphire scandal cast an even harsher light on her role. Supporters of Diana saw Meghan's alleged claim to the ring as another insult to her memory, echoing old resentments toward Camilla. Even though she had nothing to do with the scandal, her presence in the family made it harder for the monarchy to present a united front. The public could not help but see the sapphire as yet another chapter in the unresolved story of Diana, Charles, and Camilla. William and Kate, by contrast, emerged as the monarchy's anchors. Kate wearing the sapphire became more than a personal choice. It became a defensive act for the institution. Every time she appeared with it, she reminded the public of the official narrative, that Diana's memory lived on through her, not through Meghan. But this too had consequences. By emphasizing Kate as the rightful bearer of the sapphire, the monarchy inadvertently deepened the sense of rivalry. It created the impression that Diana's legacy was a prize to be won, rather than a memory to be shared. The public's reaction revealed the monarchy's fragility. For some, the scandal confirmed their distrust of the institution. They saw the monarchy as obsessed with appearances, clinging to jewels while ignoring the real issues facing the nation. For others, it reinforced their loyalty, pushing them closer to William and Kate as symbols of stability in contrast to Harry and Meghan's chaos. Either way, the scandal exposed how deeply the monarchy depends on symbols, and how dangerous it is when those symbols slip out of control. The international dimension added further strain. In the United States, Meghan had a strong base of support. There, the scandal was framed less as a family drama and more as a critique of the monarchy itself. Commentators argued that the obsession with jewels and hierarchy revealed how outdated the institution was. They defended Meghan's right to embrace Diana's memory, portraying her as a victim of a rigid system. In Britain, however, the scandal fueled resentment toward Meghan and renewed loyalty to William and Kate. This division between domestic and international perception placed the monarchy in a precarious position, forcing it to balance competing narratives across continents. The escalation of the sapphire scandal also reignited broader debates about the monarchy's future. Should such an institution, critics asked, continue to wield such symbolic power in the modern era? Why should a ring, no matter how beautiful, carry such weight in public discourse? Supporters countered that symbols are precisely what make the monarchy unique, that without them it would lose its mystique and authority. The sapphire scandal, therefore, became more than a family dispute. It became a referendum on the monarchy's role in the 21st century. For Harry, the monarchy's use of the sapphire was yet another betrayal. He had given up the ring to William in good faith, believing it would honor his mother's memory. But in his eyes, the institution had turned it into propaganda, using Diana's legacy to reinforce its image while disregarding his personal grief. Meghan's alleged claim to the ring only exposed, more painfully, how little control he had over his mother's memory. The monarchy owned the narrative, not him. This realization pushed him further away, deepening his alienation. Meghan, meanwhile, found herself trapped in a paradox. By embracing Diana's legacy, she hoped to anchor herself within the royal story. But instead, she had positioned herself in direct opposition to the institution. Her defense, that she was honoring Diana, was drowned out by the monarchy's emphasis on Kate as the true custodian of that legacy. Meghan was cast as an intruder, and every attempt to defend herself only reinforced the perception of rivalry. The ring, once a symbol of love, now embodied conflict. It exposed the fractures within the family, the monarchy's dependence on symbols, and the public's divided loyalties. It showed that legacy is not neutral, it is contested, fought over, and weaponized. For the monarchy, this was both a lesson and a warning. As long as it relies on symbols to maintain authority, it will remain vulnerable to scandals that strip those symbols of their meaning. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that the sapphire scandal had become more than just a family feud. It had become a story about the monarchy itself, its past, its present, and its uncertain future. A single ring had turned into a mirror, reflecting the fragility of an institution built on tradition in a world that demands change. And as the monarchy struggled to contain the fallout, one truth became undeniable. Diana's legacy, embodied in that sapphire, still had the power to shake the foundations of the crown. When the sapphire scandal reached its peak, the whispers that had long lingered in shadows began to rise to the surface. Talk of separation, even divorce, between Harry and Meghan. For years, their marriage had been the center of fascination, praised by some as a love story that defied royal tradition and condemned by others as reckless and disruptive. But the scandal surrounding Diana's ring cracked the foundation of that story, forcing the world to ask a question no one had dared voice too loudly before. Could Harry and Meghan's marriage survive? Divorce in the royal family is never just a personal matter. It is a public drama, a spectacle that carries consequences for the monarchy, the nation, and the global image of the crown. Diana's own divorce from Charles in 1996 was still fresh in public memory, a reminder of how family breakdowns could rock the monarchy to its core. Now, with Diana's sapphire at the center of fresh chaos, the parallels were impossible to ignore. The press, hungry for drama, latched onto the whispers, framing them as the next chapter in a story that seemed destined to repeat history. The first whispers came from palace insiders. Rumors circulated that Harry and Meghan's arguments had grown more intense, that the sapphire scandal had triggered explosive confrontations behind closed doors. Sources described Harry as furious, unable to let go of the image of Meghan with the ring, and Meghan as equally frustrated, feeling misunderstood and unfairly attacked. Their disagreements, once private, became fodder for speculation. The press reported late-night shouting matches, tense silences at public events, and moments when Harry appeared visibly distant from his wife. Soon, commentators began to connect the dots. If Harry could not forgive Meghan for crossing what he saw as a sacred boundary, what hope did their marriage have? If Meghan continued to feel vilified both by the public and by her own husband's unresolved grief, how long could she endure? The whispers of divorce grew louder, no longer confined to tabloids, but spilling into mainstream discussions. Even respected analysts began to suggest that the marriage, once hailed as a modern fairy tale, was now in danger of collapse. For Harry, the idea of divorce was a torment. He had fought so hard to build a life with Meghan, sacrificing ties to his family, his role in the monarchy, and even his public reputation. To lose his marriage would feel like losing everything he had fought for. But the sapphire scandal forced him to confront a possibility he had long denied, that his love for Meghan might not be enough to bridge the gulf between them. His rage over the ring, his sense of betrayal, and his unhealed grief over Diana combined into a storm that threatened to pull them apart. For Meghan, the whispers were equally painful. She had left her own life behind to be with Harry, giving up her acting career and stepping into a world that seemed determined to reject her. She had endured relentless media attacks, isolation, and scrutiny, all in the name of love. To now be accused of betraying Harry, to be cast as the cause of his pain, was unbearable. She defended herself passionately, insisting that she had meant only to honor Diana, but she could not ignore the growing distance between them. To her, divorce would feel like vindication for her critics, proof that she had been doomed from the start. The public, divided as always, seized on the whispers with fascination. Some expressed sympathy, saying no marriage could survive the relentless pressure of media scrutiny and family conflict. Others argued that the sapphire scandal had revealed deeper issues, that Harry and Meghan's relationship had always been fragile, built more on rebellion than stability. Polls showed declining confidence in their marriage, with many Britons believing it would not last. In the United States, however, Meghan retained strong support, with commentators framing the whispers as yet another attempt by the British establishment to undermine her. The monarchy, meanwhile, watched with unease. A divorce would not just be a personal matter for Harry and Meghan. It would be a crisis for the institution. It would reinforce the perception of instability, echoing the painful memories of Charles and Diana's collapse. Advisors feared that another high-profile royal divorce would damage public trust further, particularly among younger generations already skeptical of the monarchy's relevance. Yet the palace could do little to stop the whispers. Every effort to silence speculation only fueled it, and their silence was interpreted as confirmation. As the whispers grew louder, Harry and Meghan faced mounting pressure to present a united front. Public appearances became stages where every gesture was scrutinized. If Harry stood too far from Meghan, commentators speculated about distance. If Meghan appeared somber, headlines declared their marriage was collapsing. Even moments of affection were dismissed as performative, attempts to quell rumors. The couple, once admired for their candid displays of love, now found themselves trapped in a cycle of suspicion, unable to convince the world that they were truly united. Behind the scenes, the strain was undeniable. Friends reported that Harry often retreated into silence, brooding over the past and struggling to move forward. Meghan, feeling cornered, pushed him to focus on their shared goals, on the life they had built together in California. But the sapphire scandal lingered like a shadow, haunting every conversation. It was not just about the ring. It was about trust, grief, and the boundaries of legacy. It was about whether Harry and Meghan could reconcile their different understandings of Diana's memory and their roles in honoring it. The whispers of divorce also exposed the fragility of love under pressure. Harry and Meghan had always framed their relationship as a partnership against the world, a love story that defied tradition and expectation. But when the conflict shifted from external pressures to internal betrayal, that partnership wavered. The sapphire scandal revealed cracks that could not be blamed solely on the media or the monarchy. It forced them to confront each other, to face questions they had long avoided. Could Harry forgive? Could Meghan change? Could love survive when burdened by the weight of history? For the public, the whispers of divorce became part of the ongoing saga. They speculated about custody, about who would keep the house, about whether Meghan would remain in the United States or return to Hollywood. Some even speculated about what would happen to the ring itself. Would it return to William and Kate, or would it remain with Meghan as a reminder of the chaos it caused? These questions, though speculative, revealed the degree to which the scandal had consumed the public imagination. The sapphire ring, once a symbol of love, now symbolized the fragility of marriage under the harshest spotlight. By the end of this chapter in the story, the whispers of divorce had grown so persistent that they seemed inevitable, whether or not they were true. They revealed how deeply the sapphire scandal had cut, not just into Harry and Meghan's marriage, but into the monarchy itself. The ring was no longer just a jewel or even a scandal. It had become a wedge, dividing husband from wife, brother from brother, family from family. It was a reminder that symbols, once tainted, can destroy even the strongest bonds. For Harry and Meghan, the question was no longer whether they loved each other. It was whether love could survive the weight of legacy, betrayal, and public judgment. The whispers of divorce did not provide an answer. They left the world suspended in speculation, waiting to see whether the fairy tale would end in heartbreak, just as it had for Diana decades earlier. Every scandal that touches the House of Windsor seems to carry with it a ghost, and more often than not, that ghost is Diana. Her shadow looms over every decision, every public appearance, every attempt by her sons to shape their own paths. In life, she was the most photographed woman in the world, adored and scrutinized in equal measure. In death, she became something more, an icon, a martyr, a figure whose memory no one can escape. For Harry and William, the weight of that memory has been both blessing and curse, and the sapphire ring at the center of this chaos was the most tangible reminder of it. The sapphire was never just a jewel. When Diana chose it in 1981, it set her apart from the tradition-bound world she was marrying into. It became the emblem of her engagement, the fairy tale that captivated millions. When the fairy tale dissolved into betrayal and heartbreak, the sapphire became a silent witness, a sparkling reminder of promises broken. After Diana's death, the ring passed to her sons, carrying with it the weight of grief. For Harry, who first held it as a boy of 12 in the aftermath of unimaginable loss, it was the closest thing he had to touching his mother again. That kind of connection cannot be easily explained, nor can it be easily shared. It is deeply personal, deeply sacred. Yet Diana's memory was never just Harry's or William's. It belonged to the world. The millions who mourned her death, who left flowers outside Kensington Palace, who wept as her coffin passed through London streets. All of them felt ownership of her story. The monarchy itself has never stopped leveraging her legacy. William and Kate's marriage was presented as the continuation of her warmth and relatability, with Kate wearing the sapphire as the crown's reassurance that Diana's spirit still lived within the institution. Harry, in contrast, often framed his marriage to Meghan as his way of protecting the woman he loved from the same fate that consumed his mother. In both cases, Diana's memory became a weapon, wielded in different directions, but always central. This was the true weight of Diana's memory. It bound her sons and divided them in equal measure. William carried the public narrative, the story of Diana as a guiding light of the monarchy's future. Harry carried the private grief, the story of Diana as a mother who held him close, who whispered comfort, who shielded him from the cruelty of royal life. These two perspectives were never fully reconcilable. The sapphire ring was the bridge between them, the one object that carried both public symbolism and private intimacy. And that is why its alleged possession by Meghan was so explosive. It disrupted the fragile balance between these two versions of Diana's legacy. For Harry, the scandal forced him to confront once more the ache of being Diana's son in a world that never lets her rest. Every headline about Meghan and the sapphire was not just about his wife, it was about his mother. He was forced to relive the grief of her death, the anger at the press that hounded her, the frustration at the monarchy that failed to protect her. The sapphire was the trigger, but the real wound was deeper. It was the realization that he could never escape the weight of her memory, no matter how far he moved from the palace, no matter how loudly he tried to tell his own story. For William, the scandal reinforced his role as the custodian of Diana's legacy within the monarchy. The sapphire engagement ring, worn by Kate, had always been the centerpiece of that narrative. It reassured the public that Diana's influence lived on in the future queen, that her warmth and humanity would be carried forward. Meghan's alleged claim to the sapphire threatened that carefully constructed image. It raised questions about who truly carried Diana's memory, about whether her legacy belonged to the monarchy or to her sons as individuals. For William, who had spent years shaping the narrative, this was an unwelcome challenge. For Meghan, Diana's memory was both inspiration and burden. From the moment she entered Harry's life, she was compared to his mother. Some saw her as Diana reborn, glamorous, empathetic, defiant of tradition. Others saw her as an imposter, trying to replicate what could never be replicated. Meghan herself often spoke of her admiration for Diana, of how she inspired her own humanitarian efforts. But admiration is not the same as ownership. By allegedly wearing or possessing Diana's sapphire, Meghan stepped into a minefield. What she may have intended as tribute was interpreted as intrusion, as if she were claiming a legacy that was not hers to hold. The weight of Diana's memory also fell on the monarchy as an institution. Diana remains its most beloved figure in modern history, yet also its most damning critic. Her interviews exposed the cracks in the system. Her struggles highlighted the coldness of palace life, and her death underscored the cruelty of the press. The monarchy has spent decades trying to reconcile itself with her legacy, using her image to humanize itself while simultaneously trying to control the narrative of her story. The sapphire scandal reminded the world that Diana's memory is not controllable. It lives on in unpredictable ways, resurfacing whenever least expected, destabilizing even the most carefully managed appearances. The public's attachment to Diana ensures that her memory will always carry weight. Every time Kate appears with the sapphire, it sparks nostalgia. Every time Harry speaks of his mother, it sparks sympathy. Every time Meghan is compared to Diana, it sparks debate. Her memory is not static. It is alive, contested, and constantly reshaped. That is why the sapphire scandal struck so deeply. It was not just about jewelry. It was about the ongoing battle over Diana's legacy, about who gets to define her story, about how her memory continues to shape the monarchy decades after her death. In many ways, the weight of Diana's memory is unbearable. It is too heavy for William, who must balance honoring his mother with being the face of an institution she often criticized. It is too heavy for Harry, who must live with the grief of losing her while being forced to watch her memory exploited by the press and the crown. It is too heavy for Meghan, who entered the family only to find herself cast in Diana's shadow at every turn. And it is too heavy for the monarchy, which must carry her legacy while knowing it can never escape the comparisons she invites. The sapphire ring, small though it may be, is the perfect symbol of this weight. It is beautiful yet heavy with history, dazzling yet burdened with sorrow. It cannot be worn without invoking Diana, without summoning her ghost. To touch it is to step into her story, willingly or not. That is why its scandal mattered so much, why it became chaos. Because in the end, the ring was never just a ring. It was Diana herself, and no one who touched it could escape the consequences. By the close of this chapter, one truth was undeniable. Diana's memory is the most powerful force still haunting the monarchy. More than Charles, more than Camilla, more than William or Harry, it is Diana who shapes how the world sees the Windsors. Her sapphire ring is the embodiment of that memory, and the chaos surrounding it proves that her influence is as strong now as it was when she walked among us. For Harry, Meghan, and the monarchy, the weight of Diana's memory is both their inheritance and their curse. It is the burden they cannot escape, and it is the force that will continue to define them, long after the sapphire scandal fades from the headlines. Every story that involves the British royal family eventually circles back to one unavoidable truth. Symbols matter more than almost anything else. Symbols are the monarchy's currency, the lifeblood that sustains it through centuries of change. Diana's sapphire ring was one of the most powerful of those symbols. It carried the story of a young woman thrust into a fairy tale, the heartbreak that followed, and the enduring memory of compassion that outlived her. For Harry, it was a piece of his mother's soul. For William, it was a bridge between her legacy and the future of the monarchy. For Kate, it was a daily reminder of the woman she never met but was destined to be compared to. For Meghan, it became the center of a storm she could never have imagined. The scandal of Meghan allegedly taking the sapphire was never just about jewelry. It was about everything that ring represented: grief, sacrifice, rivalry, and inheritance. It became the spark that reignited old wounds between Harry and William, cast Meghan once more as a divisive figure, and forced the monarchy to confront its deepest vulnerabilities. The chaos it unleashed revealed how fragile the bonds of family can be when weighed down by history, and how quickly symbols can shift from emblems of unity to weapons of division. For Harry, the scandal was a breaking point. He had spent years trying to carve out a life separate from the institution that haunted him, only to find himself dragged back into its drama by a single piece of jewelry. The ring forced him to relive the loss of his mother, the sacrifices he made for his brother, and the pain of watching his wife step into territory that reopened old wounds. His rage, his despair, his isolation, these were not about Meghan alone, but about the unbearable weight of being Diana's son in a world that refuses to let her rest. For Meghan, the scandal was both a defense and a condemnation. She insisted her intentions were pure, that she sought only to honor Diana's legacy. But perception was stronger than intention. To the public, her act was seen as appropriation, as if she had trespassed into a memory that did not belong to her. She became once again the outsider, the disruptor, the figure cast in opposition to tradition. And yet, for her supporters, she was also the victim of double standards, condemned for acts that others in the family were celebrated for. The sapphire scandal revealed not only Meghan's precarious place in the monarchy, but also the biases that continue to shape how she is perceived. For William and Kate, the scandal was an attack on the narrative they had spent years building. Kate wearing the sapphire was supposed to symbolize continuity, the smooth passage of Diana's legacy into the monarchy's future. Meghan's alleged possession of it disrupted that story, raising questions about who truly carried Diana's memory. William's fury, Kate's composure, and their insistence on guarding the ring's symbolism underscored how central Diana still is to the monarchy's image. It showed that even decades after her death, Diana remains the monarchy's greatest asset and its greatest challenge. For the monarchy as a whole, the sapphire scandal was a mirror reflecting its weaknesses. An institution built on symbols cannot afford for those symbols to be tainted, yet it could do nothing to contain the scandal. The palace's silence only fueled speculation, its inability to control the narrative exposing its fragility. The scandal reignited old wounds about Diana, Charles, and Camilla, reminding the public of the monarchy's failures as much as its resilience. It showed that the crown, for all its pomp and tradition, is still at the mercy of perception, of press, and of memory. The public reaction ensured that the scandal would never fade quietly. Diana was, and remains, the people's princess. Her memory belongs as much to the public as to her family. The sapphire, therefore, was never just Harry's, William's, Kate's, or Meghan's, it was everyone's. That collective sense of ownership is what made the scandal so explosive. It tapped into grief that still lingers, nostalgia that still burns, and anger that still simmers. It reminded the world that Diana is not a closed chapter of history, but a living presence in the hearts of millions. The whispers of divorce, the escalation of family conflict, the relentless media frenzy, all of these were symptoms of the deeper issue, the struggle over Diana's memory. Who owns it? Who carries it? Who has the right to claim it? Those questions remain unresolved, and perhaps they always will. Diana was larger than life, and her memory is too vast to be contained by any one person or institution. The sapphire scandal revealed the danger of trying to claim her, the chaos that follows when symbols are contested. And yet, amid the chaos, there is also clarity. The story of the sapphire ring shows us that love, legacy, and chaos are inseparably intertwined. Love, Harry's love for his mother, his love for Meghan, William's love for Kate, was always present, always sincere. Legacy, the attempt to carry forward Diana's memory, to honor her through symbols and stories, was always the intention, but chaos was the inevitable result, because legacy cannot be neatly managed, and love cannot erase the wounds of history. The conclusion of this story is not resolution, but reflection. The sapphire scandal will fade from headlines, as all scandals eventually do, but the questions it raised will linger. Can the monarchy survive in a world where symbols are contested and meanings are unstable? Can Harry and Meghan build a marriage strong enough to withstand not only their differences, but the relentless intrusion of the past? Can William and Kate carry Diana's legacy without it becoming a weapon against Harry? Can Diana's memory ever be at peace, or will it always be pulled apart by those who claim her? These questions do not have simple answers, but perhaps that is the point. Diana herself was never simple. She was complex, contradictory, both saint and sinner in the eyes of the world. Her memory reflects that complexity, and the sapphire ring is simply the latest chapter in a story that will never truly end. As the credits of this story roll, we are left not with closure, but with a reminder. Some legacies are too powerful to be contained, some symbols too charged to be neutral, some loves too scarred to be simple. Diana's sapphire ring was one such symbol. It united and divided, honored and betrayed, comforted and wounded. It was the ring that defined a generation, and the scandal that revealed just how heavy the weight of memory can be. And so the story of the sapphire ends where it began, not with a jewel, but with a woman, Diana, whose life and death continue to shape her sons, her family, and her nation. Her memory is the thread that binds this story together, the force that ensures she will never be forgotten. The sapphire scandal may fade, but Diana endures. And in the end, that is the chaos and the beauty of legacy. It never dies, it only changes form, leaving those who inherit it to wrestle with its weight.